So, let's talk about former President Donald Trump. He had some, shall we say, opinions on trade. And Apple, the company that makes your shiny, expensive rectangle of distraction, found itself right in his crosshairs. He floated the idea of a hefty 25% tariff on Apple's products. Why? Because in his view, these gadgets should be stamped "Made in the USA." This wasn't just a casual thought, mind you, it was a threat, a big one, that sent shivers down the spines of tech executives and anyone who enjoys not paying even for an iPhone. The core of this presidential demand was disarmingly simple. Apple, make your phones here, in America, not in China, not anywhere else, but right here on home soil. He believed this would magically bring back manufacturing jobs, a constant refrain of his administration. The fact that Apple, like most tech companies, had spent decades building intricate global supply chains, details. His dissatisfaction was palpable. Companies making billions while manufacturing overseas was, to him, just not cricket. He wanted those factories stateside, period. The message was clear: shift your production, or face the tariff music. This grand vision aimed to reshape how and where global tech companies did their business, whether they liked it or not, creating widespread uncertainty. The president's stance was a direct challenge to the established order of international manufacturing, promising a showdown that nobody in the business world particularly asked for, but everyone had to watch. In the face of all this, Apple wasn't exactly sitting still. For years they'd been working to diversify their manufacturing. A key part of this grand shuffle was India. Apple started shifting a noticeable chunk of its iPhone production there. This wasn't just about avoiding trouble, it was also about tapping into India's massive market and its ambitions to become a new electronics manufacturing powerhouse. India, for its part, was rolling out the welcome mat, eager for the jobs and investment. But President Trump was not amused. He publicly voiced his displeasure with Apple's CEO, Tim Cook. The idea of iPhones being assembled in India, potentially to be sold back to American consumers, really seemed to get under his skin. His logic was that American companies selling to Americans should make their products in America. Apple's move, however, wasn't just a reaction to Trump. It was, and is, a sensible long-term business strategy. Spreading production across different countries helps manage all sorts of risks. Unfortunately, this sensible approach ran headfirst into the rather less nuanced America First doctrine. This fundamental disagreement set the stage for a very public and very consequential tug-of-war over where your next iPhone would be born. Now, about that idea of just packing up iPhone production and moving it lock, stock, and barrel to the United States. Many experts, people who actually understand manufacturing and global supply chains, weighed in. Their collective assessment? It's, to put it mildly, highly impractical. They pointed to the incredibly complex, deeply entrenched global networks that have been fine-tuned over decades. These aren't just a few factories, they're a vast ecosystem of suppliers, logistics, and skilled labor. Recreating that in the US wouldn't just be difficult, it would be a Herculean task, bordering on impossible in the short term. One of the most glaring hurdles, as highlighted by these killjoy experts, would be the cost. Labor in the US is significantly more expensive than in the countries where iPhones are currently assembled. Then you'd need to build brand new, state-of-the-art factories, and train a massive workforce. Guess who'd end up paying for all that? Yes, you, the consumer, when the price of an iPhone skyrockets. This economic reality seemed to be a minor footnote in the grand political vision. An iPhone isn't just a pretty case, it's a marvel of miniature engineering, packed with parts sourced from all over the globe. Trying to replicate that entire supply chain domestically, or even reroute it all to US factories, presents a logistical nightmare of epic proportions. So the expert consensus was pretty clear. A full-scale shift of iPhone production to the US was not a simple, economically viable, or quick solution. While the political appeal of made-in-USA iPhones is undeniable, the practical and financial realities paint a very different, much more complicated picture. Faced with this presidential pressure cooker, Apple did what many large corporations do when under political fire. It announced some very large numbers, specifically, a commitment to invest a staggering $500 billion in the United States. This wasn't chump change, it was a headline-grabbing figure clearly designed to demonstrate Apple's dedication to the American economy. Such announcements are standard corporate PR, of course. They're a way to say, look, we're good guys, we create jobs, we love America, especially when someone powerful is questioning your patriotism or, worse, threatening your bottom line. Part of this impressive-sounding investment included plans for a new server production facility. And where was this beacon of American manufacturing to be located? Houston, Texas. This was a tangible example of Apple expanding its US footprint, albeit for specific high-value components like Mac Pro computers and servers, not the mass-market iPhones that were the main point of contention. By investing in US-based infrastructure and creating some American jobs, Apple was perhaps hoping to find a middle ground. It was a strategic move, a way to show willing without completely upending its entire global production model. The timing of this $500 billion pledge was, shall we say, convenient. It came amidst the tariff threats and the very public calls for Apple to bring manufacturing home. Companies are not charities, they are strategic entities. And using large-scale investments to navigate tricky political waters is a well-worn tactic in the corporate playbook. Now, let's get to the part that directly affects you, me, and anyone who's ever considered buying an iPhone. If President Trump's threatened tariffs actually materialized, what would happen? Well, it's not rocket science. Tariffs are essentially taxes on imported goods, and companies, especially those with healthy profit margins like Apple, often have a clever way of dealing with new taxes. They pass them on. Yes, to you, the consumer. This means that your next iPhone, already a premium-priced device, could have become even more painfully expensive. Your bank account would have felt that America First policy directly. Of course, Apple might have chosen to absorb some of those tariff costs, perhaps. If the tariffs were, say, below a certain threshold, maybe not the full 25%, but something less dramatic, Apple could have decided to take a hit on its own margins. Companies sometimes do this to avoid alienating customers with sudden price hikes or to maintain their competitive edge. But let's be clear, Apple is a business, a very profitable one. Sacrificing profits is not usually plan A. This whole situation put Apple in a rather unenviable bind. They had to juggle manufacturing costs, the looming threat of tariffs, and the price sensitivity of their global customer base. The Trump administration's tariffs didn't just ruffle feathers in Cupertino, it also complicated US-India trade relations. These policies created fresh headaches for negotiators, complicating Apple's manufacturing expansion in India. The US is a massive trade partner for India, so any new friction, especially tariff-related, can have significant economic consequences. Discussions became a multi-level chess game and a minefield. India had been positioning itself as the next big thing in global manufacturing, actively courting big tech, including Apple. But then, in a trade policy plot twist, after President Trump eased some tariffs on Chinese goods, India faced US tariffs nearly as high as those on China. This undercut India's pitch as the more tariff-friendly option. This shift messed with India's strategic economic planning and its partnership with Apple. With Indian-made goods facing US tariffs, the economic calculus for companies like Apple started to look less rosy. The shifting sands of US tariff policy disrupted the blossoming romance between Apple and India. Apple's decision to boost iPhone production in India was a big deal for India's manufacturing ambitions. But new tariffs meant those iPhones, if shipped to the US, could face hefty import duties. This complicated Apple's strategic calculations for US-bound products. President Trump suggested Apple move all production to the US. This put Apple in an awkward spot, caught between US demands and its global strategy. The saga highlighted how national trade agendas can collide with corporate strategies. Indian officials found themselves burning the midnight oil, working to secure a reduction in US tariffs. The prevailing rate on certain Indian goods, around 26%, was a significant impediment. Indian negotiators engaged in intense discussions with their American counterparts. The objective was clear: lessen the economic sting of these tariffs. A temporary reprieve from some tariffs was set to expire, adding urgency. Without a new agreement, Indian exporters would face higher duties. The outcome was critical for many Indian businesses. India aims to grow its manufacturing base and boost exports. US tariff policies acted as a considerable barrier to these aspirations.